everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I'm here to talk about all of the books that I read in November. So let's jump in. Now, if you watched my vlog, you will have seen a lot of these already talked about a little bit. They're falling over already. But let's start from the beginning and work our way forwards. The first book I read in November was my nonfiction book for the month, which was The Genius of Shakespeare by Jonathan Bate. This is a book that I started in September. I put it to the side so I could focus on my prompts for Victober, and then I picked it back up at the beginning of this month. It is wonderful. It is Jonathan Bate looking at Shakespeare and trying to figure out what makes him special, what makes him have lasted this long when so many of his contemporaries really haven't, certainly not in the same way. And he breaks it down in any number of ways. He also addresses a variety of controversies, like the whole authorship controversy, and could Shakespeare really have written everything he did with the level of education that he had, or was it someone else masquerading as him for a variety of reasons? The idea that Shakespeare's plays were not original and that therefore makes them lesser than. And he goes into the fact that in Tudor schools and Elizabethan schools, you were encouraged to imitate the types of writing that you were reading, to put your own spin on them, to improve upon them. And that is exactly what Shakespeare did whenever he based his plays off of pre-existing stories, or sometimes even pre-existing plays, which he often did. He gets very snarky at some points, which I absolutely love, considering this is a very academically written text. I loved the little bits of snark that he was able to throw in. But given how dense and academic it was, it did mean that it took me a long time to plod through it. It was worth it, but it's not necessarily a quick, fun read, but very well worth your time. The next book that I read was the Figaro Trilogy by Pierre de Beaumarchais, which consists of the plays The Barber of Seville, The Marriage of Figaro, and The Guilty Mother. The first two were turned into very well-known operas, which I love, but the third, as far as I know, was not. And I was thrilled to get my hand on this translation, which was done by David Coward, and I have so many notes. I actually wrote them down on a little post-it here. There were so many nods to the operas as I read it in these plays, little moments of dialogue that reflected an important aria, say, in the operas. And I really loved that, but I had to wonder, were all of those nods already there in the original French plays, and then the operas picked up on them and used them? Or have the operas become so pervasive that as Coward was translating them, he couldn't help but drop those in? I don't speak enough French to read the originals to really know one way or the other, but I enjoyed them anyway. These plays were actually banned by the French government because they, in part, helped to foment the French Revolution and anti-nobility sentiment, given that Figaro has so many diatribes in these plays against his master and all of the ridiculous decisions that his master makes, and against the government at large, and saying, you know, I am so much smarter and so much better than these other people. Why am I stuck in this position and they're the ones in charge? Which is fascinating and wonderful. However, those diatribes do get a bit long. So while they were great for the revolution, I'm very glad that they were ultimately cut from the operas. Plus, I don't know how an actor would memorize that much dialogue. Some of them go on for 2 pages. This is especially apparent in The Marriage of Figaro, in Figaro's Act 5 diatribe, which we know in the opera world as his aria Aprite l'occhi, I think. It's the one about men open your eyes, see what women are. They have made it much more succinct in that aria than it is here in this play. In that aria, he is just railing against the fact that he thinks his fiancée is going to be unfaithful to him on their wedding night of all days, and he goes on a rampage about how unjust this is, and men don't make the same mistake I do. Open your eyes, watch them carefully, see them for what they are. Whereas here in this play, he retells his entire life story and all of the moments that he feels were unfair to him in one way or another. And I'm once again very glad for Mozart and Da Ponte's edits on that. The Count is also fascinating in this Marriage of Figaro, in that he actually has a moment of opening up and explaining why he has become such a womanizer, which is never really made clear in the operas, which can be fascinating in itself, because it gives each performer the opportunity to play him a little bit differently based on what they think and what they feel, given the work that they have to use as a reference. Despite that, though, he is proven to still be incredibly hypocritical and unpredictable, because it continues into play number 3. So you begin to wonder, should we see him that way from all the way back in Barber of Seville, or should it be a gradual reveal throughout the 3 plays? I'm of two minds, because I think they both work. And lastly, The Guilty Mother was a tough one for me. One of my favorite characters is no longer in it. All of the relationships are extremely fractured, or at least that's how they seem, which was rather upsetting for me. Some more than others, some you see coming. But it also gives a fascinating perspective on the French Revolution itself, because the first play was written in the 1770s, the Marriage of Figaro was written in the 1780s, The Guilty Mother was written in 1792. So it was being performed and written during the Reign of Terror. And Beaumarchais actually takes these Spanish nobles and their servants and their family and has them travel to and live in Paris for the Count's work as an ambassador. And hearing the revolution being told through their eyes is really incredible. Their son is, of course, caught up in the whole thing and loves it and is your full-on teenage rebel. But hearing the Count and the Countess's perspective about how they cannot be called Count and Countess here anymore, and hearing the servants lament this new way of life and how they have to hide themselves almost and make themselves more ordinary, is really incredible. I loved that aspect. So I would highly recommend all 3, especially if you are an opera buff. The next book I read was The Jane Austen Society by Natalie Jenner. This is a fictionalized account of how the Jane Austen Society came to be in the 1940s. Given all of that fictionalization, an Austen purist might have trouble with it and might poo-poo it a bit, but I wouldn't dismiss it quite so quickly, because while it is rather fluffy, it is full of really enjoyable characters. You get a male perspective on Austen quite a bit through several of the characters, which I feel like we don't really get in the modern era. Jane Austen is made to seem to be very much a woman's area of interest, which of course is not true. Anyone can enjoy Jane Austen. And more than anything, this book is a love letter to Jane Austen's novels and the effect that they can have on people to heal, to better know themselves, and to create a community, which is something that I really enjoyed. Plus, it threw me back to my time visiting Chawton House and Chawton Cottage, which just felt extra special. The next book I finished was Tilly and the Map of Stories by Anna James. This is the 3rd book in the Pages and Company series, so I can't tell you what this one is about specifically, but Tilly and the Book Wanderers is about a young girl called Tilly who lives with her grandparents, who own the bookshop Pages and Company, who discovers that she and her family are book wanderers, meaning they can literally enter stories and walk around in them and interact with the characters Their favorite characters might come out and talk to them, characters that they have deep relationships with. Secrets begin to be revealed about book wandering. There is a system of management to it, and it becomes more and more complicated, and Tilly is desperately needed to save the day, to preserve a love of books and book wandering. I loved this book. I felt like there were moments where things were solved a bit too quickly. We jumped a couple of steps, but ultimately its message about how every book has touched someone's life at some point, so you cannot call any book unimportant or unworthy, was absolutely wonderful, and I would highly recommend this whole series. This is the last book in the series, but I believe she's working on a spin-off series, which I will look forward to. Next, I read How to Find Love in a Bookshop by Veronica Henry. This is about a young woman who was raised in a bookshop. She and her father lived above the shop, and now she's a grown woman and he has passed away. And she comes back to try and take over the bookshop and keep it running, despite a number of hurdles. And her search for love and everyone else in the community who comes together to help her. It is not high literature by any means, but it was the perfect, sweet, cozy, wonderful book to just curl up with this winter and warm your heart. Any book lover will adore it. Its community of people was one that I really fell in love with. Next, I buddy read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke with Marissa at Blatantly Bookish. It was really good. It was incredibly surprising. I did not expect it to go any of the places that it went, but we had some very long conversations about it nonetheless, which is surprising given how short a book it is, especially in comparison to Susanna's other work, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It is the story of Piranesi, who lives in the halls, which has its own sea, and only he understands them, and it is just him and a person known as the Other in these halls. But as the story unfolds, Piranesi begins to learn that that's not entirely true, and there's more to his world than he thought there was. This took so many twists and turns. It has some really fascinating things to say about captivity versus freedom and spiritual practices and power, and that's really all I can say without giving anything away, and I don't want to give anything away because experiencing those twists and turns without any expectations is truly amazing. Lastly, I read Last Tang Standing by Lauren Ho, which is the story of Andrea Tang, who is a very successful lawyer. She's looking to go that next step up the corporate ladder, and she has everything going for her except that she is not married, as her Chinese-Malaysian family would want her to be. And so she starts going on all of these dates, thinks she's found someone who is her family's idea of absolutely perfect. But there's also her office rival Suresh, and we all know what's going to happen there. And that really sums up why I didn't like this. It was extremely predictable. You could tell exactly who she was going to end up with right from the off. There were no surprises. She self-sabotaged far too much to my way of thinking. I just never warmed to any of the characters, and any of the characters that I did sort of warm to, you never got to hear from their perspective. So it was a quick read, and I was desperate to see if she was ever going to get her life in order. But I wouldn't call it a book that I enjoyed, and certainly not one that I would like to keep. It was promised Crazy Rich Asians meets Bridget Jones's Diary. It leans more heavily on the Bridget Jones than the Crazy Rich Asians, which is unfortunate because I much prefer Crazy Rich Asians to Bridget Jones for much the same reasons. So there you have it. Those are all the books I read this month. Have you read any of these books yourself? Did you agree with me, disagree? Are you intrigued by any of these books? What did you read in November that you would highly recommend to me? Let me know in the comments down below, and until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.